In recent weeks, Prime Minister Donald Tusk has warned of a risk of war in Europe by 2027. This statement was seen as a signal from Moscow. Are the Zapad 2025 exercises just maneuvers or a real threat? We will discuss this with General Yaroslav Krashevsky. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Prime Minister Tusk has issued a warning about a possible armed confrontation by the year 2027. In your assessment, how realistic are such scenarios today?
In fact, Europe is already experiencing a conflict. This war has been ongoing in Ukraine since the year 2014 and escalated to full scale on the 24th of February 2022. The Zapad joint military exercises you mentioned earlier will very likely be used by the Russian Federation as a means to clearly demonstrate its strength, military capabilities, and overall power, despite having conducted a full-scale war on Ukrainian territory for more than 3 years. Russia will neither back down nor show any hesitation if it encounters circumstances that are unfavorable to President Putin's administration. In such a scenario, it may even resort to deploying its armed forces to carry out an attack against one of the member states of the North Atlantic Alliance. Most likely, this would be one of the so-called Baltic countries, namely Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia. In my view, this scenario appears rather unlikely. It is far more probable that such a narrative will primarily be employed for propaganda purposes, serving to influence public perception, rather than representing a realistic or actionable course of events. Russia is suffering enormous losses in its war against Ukraine. Recovering from these losses, given the economic capabilities of the Russian Federation, will take approximately 7 to 8 years. If Russia has been unable to definitively resolve the ongoing situation in Ukraine since the year 2014, then initiating any form of military or strategic attack against the North Atlantic Alliance, which currently comprises 33 member states, would be an act of utter madness, complete recklessness, and profound miscalculation. The activation of Article 3, Article 4, or ultimately Article 5, which enshrines the principle of all for one, one for all, would inevitably trigger a total economic catastrophe, severely affecting not only Russia itself but also producing far-reaching and potentially destabilizing consequences well beyond its national borders. Instead, Russia will most likely focus its efforts on conducting hybrid warfare and broad information campaigns against the West. The overarching goal will be to systematically destabilize the societies of a united Western bloc, attempting to reduce public support for governmental and European initiatives, especially those closely tied to cooperation with the United States, and to weaken, or even disrupt, the continued political, economic, and military assistance provided to Ukraine. On the other hand, it should be carefully noted, this is my personal opinion, that the United States will have a strong interest in keeping Russia deeply entangled in the ongoing war in Ukraine for as long as possible, at least until Washington manages to reach a stable political and diplomatic understanding with China. As for the Taiwan issue, we know very well that the administration of President Trump is, if not entirely fixated on Taiwan, then at the very least extremely focused on China and its growing influence in global political and economic affairs. Under Donald Trump's presidency, the United States will seek absolute and unquestionable economic and military dominance, positioning itself as the global guardian of peace. Therefore, it is likely that Washington will first attempt a political and diplomatic path. If that proves ineffective, then in the timeframe mentioned by our Prime Minister, a confrontation between the United States and China may occur. China finds itself in a somewhat disadvantaged position from the outset, being geographically and strategically surrounded by US-aligned countries, most notably Japan, Australia, South Korea, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Without active involvement from Russia, still deeply engaged in Ukraine, and without support or strategic positioning from Iran, China will face significant geopolitical and military challenges. This is why recent U.S. strikes on Iran's defense industry were not only a reaction to Israel's military operations but also a step to influence the broader regional balance of power. They deprived, for a certain period of time, because this was not a permanent deprivation, but a temporary one, the Iranian defense industry of its full production capabilities. As a result, Iran will not be able to supply its products along two separate fronts. I am referring primarily to unmanned aerial systems, which are being used extensively and on a mass scale in Ukraine. Regardless of whether we approach this hypothetically, theoretically, or in any other way, it must not be ignored. European societies will begin preparing for the possibility that, should such a conflict arise, because Russia is, regrettably, unpredictable in its actions, as warned by the leaders of the European Union and NATO member states, it will be necessary to demonstrate strength. The only argument that carries weight with the Russian Federation in any dialogue, whether bilateral or multilateral, is, and always has been, the argument of force. Russia fears strength and does not seek confrontation with a more powerful adversary.
Are there currently any military or political signals that point to a possible escalation of Russian actions against NATO?
In my view, if Russia chooses to escalate, it will do so in the direction of Moldova. For President Putin, the primary objective is, first and foremost, to retain control over Crimea. The second goal is to dominate the Black Sea basin. Domination understood as full control over the maritime trade routes that pass through the Black Sea region. For Putin, it would be considerably easier and strategically more convenient to initiate military operations specifically along the Moldovan axis, given its geographical position and potential tactical advantages. From there, the next step would be a push southward toward Odessa, placing the Ukrainian armed forces in a highly vulnerable position. The aim would be to secure a land corridor for the delivery of supplies to the troops already stationed in Crimea. That is what I would be concerned about. If such a situation were to occur, then within the timeframe leading up to the year 2027, escalation could take place over the following 5 to 6 years, provided that President Putin remains in power. Escalation may extend to additional countries that are not part of any alliance. I would pay closer attention to Kazakhstan, which, if I am not mistaken, possesses the second largest reserves of natural gas, making it a country of significant strategic and economic importance in the region. I believe that is where Russia may seek to escalate military activity or secure economic dominance, at least within the Euro-Asian region. Let me emphasize once again, at this moment, from the perspective of a former military officer, an attack on any allied state would be an act of madness. Such an attack would likely trigger escalation and could even lead to a global conflict, a third world war. However, it would be heavily concentrated along the eastern flank. Unfortunately, it would severely impact the frontline states, starting with Estonia and ending with Bulgaria. And that is something we must prepare for. To prevent such a scenario, I must reiterate, the societies of allied nations, that is, the member states of the North Atlantic Alliance and the European Union, must demonstrate their strength, their determination, and their resilience against all forms of information warfare conducted by the Russian Federation.
So can we generally treat the Zapad 2025 scenario as a genuine strategic plan by Russia toward NATO and Poland? Or is it more of an intimidation tactic?
It will be a combination of both. Please remember that Zapad, if memory serves me correctly, it was either Zapad 2019 or Zapad 2020, was used to rehearse the very plan that was later implemented during the invasion of February 2022. In this case, it is almost certain that the Russian Federation, through the next edition of these military exercises, will aim to carry out large-scale, highly provocative, and carefully planned diversionary operations specifically directed against the member states of NATO. This is precisely where our resilience and careful judgment are most needed, to prevent a situation in which we might respond impulsively with hasty or poorly considered retaliatory actions. Any response must be a coordinated decision, and we must monitor the development of events very closely, especially after the exercise concludes. The drill I referred to earlier, during which military equipment was temporarily left behind and later retrieved to facilitate the planned invasion of Ukraine, represented an extremely dangerous and highly risky situation, one that requires careful and continuous monitoring. As for the exercise itself, it has three dimensions. First, a propaganda dimension, second, a provocative, sabotage, and diversionary dimension, and third, a possible operational component. It is likely that some of the operational plans adopted for this exercise will concern Moldova and the southwestern region of Ukraine, where Russian forces may seek to test how their operational and tactical assumptions would perform under real-world conditions.
And how realistic is the use of such exercises as a cover for aggression, for example, not necessarily in the Baltic states, but in the Suwalki Gap region?
The Suwalki Gap is, in effect, part of the Baltic region. As I mentioned earlier, the Russian Federation remains highly unpredictable in its actions and decision-making. That is precisely why NATO and the frontline states must maintain a heightened state of alert and remain extremely vigilant at all times. We must act with strategic foresight. I believe that our armed forces in the respective countries should increase their alertness and possibly even raise their readiness levels, because we never know what the Russian Federation might do. Personally, I expect a series of provocative and sabotage actions, and that will likely be the core of this exercise, specifically in terms of Russian activity around the Suwalki Gap.
And in your opinion, is Russia aiming for an open conflict with NATO? Or is it more likely to continue destabilizing actions?
In my opinion, Russia intends to continue its destabilizing efforts. Let me remind you that everything since 2014, and especially since 2022, has been driven by President Putin's objective to bring about the complete destabilization of the North Atlantic Alliance, and perhaps even its collapse. The goal has been to portray NATO as ineffective, lacking cohesion among member states, and to suggest that the lofty principles of Article 5, unity and collective defense, are nothing more than words on paper. In reality, the opposite has occurred. NATO has expanded, and that is a positive development. Now, President Putin will continue to use various tactics, particularly in the realm of information warfare and hybrid conflict, to further destabilize Europe. This destabilization may not lead to the actual disintegration of the European Union or NATO, as such an outcome is highly unlikely, if not virtually impossible. Instead, it will likely be a calculated attempt to influence public opinion and undermine morale in a manner designed to weaken Western European societies' support for their own governments that, from the very outset of the conflict, have consistently pursued policies of support for Ukraine, not only in political and diplomatic terms, but also through substantial and tangible military assistance.
What kind of preventive measures should Poland be taking right now, both military and informational, to build resilience against all these Russian activities?
You know, we cannot speak about the details, as this information is classified. These measures have been underway since the year 2014, and their intensity increased significantly after the year 2022. We are increasing the size of our armed forces and modernizing them as a leading member of NATO, allocating nearly 5% of our gross domestic product to national defense. Numerous armament programs are underway, and we are systematically eliminating post-Soviet equipment from the organizational structures of our military. We have launched a range of pro-defense initiatives, including voluntary military service, the territorial defense forces, and various other programs such as joint training exercises with professional soldiers. This is precisely why, at this particularly important, significant, even critical, moment for a country that suspended military conscription and, for more than a dozen years, did not train its personnel reserves on the scale once practiced, it is essential to teach as many citizens as possible how to behave in the event of an armed conflict. Let me know if you'd like this integrated into a longer segment or adjusted for pacing and emphasis. I recall the television broadcasts from Ukraine just before and immediately after the 24th of February, 2022, where every effort was made to train as many Ukrainian citizens as possible in how to respond during air and missile attacks, and how to handle weapons. Of course, these were very rapid and intensive training sessions that covered only the most basic skills. Without regular, cyclical training, it is simply not possible to maintain these skills. The positive aspect is that if such a person receives a weapon, there is no need to teach them everything from the beginning. Somewhere in the back of their mind, they retain the basic knowledge acquired during that training. We are implementing these measures in our country. We have established the Cyber Defense Forces, a vital component responsible for safeguarding our security, both in the digital domain and beyond. At this moment, these are among the most capable military units in Europe. We are establishing drone forces, which are a direct result of lessons learned from Ukrainian battlefield experience. We have built a highly capable missile and artillery force, as well as a powerful armored capability, precisely the kind of strength needed to deter Russia's ambitions to advance deeper into Eastern Europe. We are finalizing the development of our Air Force and completing the construction of our air defense systems. Very soon, we will possess the most advanced technologies in these areas anywhere in Europe. I can proudly say that we are becoming a true power in the areas we have discussed. All that remains is satellite reconnaissance, satellite positioning, and satellite communications. However, dedicated units within our country are already working on these capabilities, and I believe that in the near future we will become the owners of our own solutions, ones that will serve not only Poland's needs, but also those of our allies.
And what can you tell us about Poland's Iron Defender 2025 exercise? Is it a significant response to the Russian-Belarusian drills?
It is not a response to the Belarusian exercises. The Polish armed forces conduct training regularly and cyclically. Every year, we hold exercises that engage, at minimum, the divisional level and above. These exercises encompass a variety of formats, from command and staff exercises focused on strategic planning to live drills involving the active deployment of military units in realistic scenarios, and we conduct them consistently and without interruption. This is not a reaction. These exercises, for as long as I can remember, are typically scheduled for the months of September and October. This period is characterized by intermittent rainfall, which provides suitable conditions for the safe use of live ammunition on the training grounds. During the summer months, particularly throughout the holiday season, the risk of wildfires is significantly higher, making it impractical to conduct large-scale exercises. Therefore, these exercises are carefully planned for times when the risk is reduced and fully manageable, ensuring that they do not pose any threat to the participating nations or surrounding areas. Therefore, I would not interpret this as a response. No, it is simply that Poland, as a long-standing member of the North Atlantic Alliance, is fully integrated into the planning, preparation, and execution of military exercises. We conduct them at the national level, at the allied level, and at the international level. I myself served as the commander of the Polish-Lithuanian-Ukrainian multinational brigade, and I can firmly confirm that this is not a response. It is a standard procedure, a regular training cycle that is not unique to the Polish armed forces.
Thank you for the conversation. Our guest today was General Yaroslav Krashevsky. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. My regards.